We have many visitors today. I would like to welcome all of you. We have a most exciting concert today, and it's in celebration of the 25th anniversary of the Holocaust lecture series. This is our 25th series. We have gone from having about 30 students huddled in Stevenson 101 before it was remodeled to Warren Auditorium. We're most grateful to have you here. We're excited about sharing part of the culture of Eastern European Jews with you. I told my students it was going to be hard to keep their feet still. I think that that's still the case. One thing I would like to point out to the students is part of the fees that you have paid have enabled us to bring the Catskill Klezmer here. So I thank you all for paying your tuition on time. It's my great pleasure to introduce you to Brian Wilson, who is the chair of the music department, but also someone who is involved with the Klezmer group, and he can tell you a little bit about that. We've been trying for several years to cook something up, and we finally did it, so it feels really good. Why don't you welcome Brian Wilson?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Brian Wilson. I'm the music department chair, and this is my 7th year here in California. And prior to that, I taught for 10 years in upstate New York, in a tiny little shtetl, which is Yiddish for village, called Oneonta, New York. And on here, please. And surrounded by these wonderful colleagues. They are all from Oneonta. We all lived together in Oneonta. I taught at a small liberal arts college there called Hartwick College, and they were all colleagues of mine. And I used to play for this group. When the piano player couldn't make gigs, I would fill in for him. And it's just a wonderful kind of music. Klezmer music is, I always like to think of it as a kind of a Jewish jazz music, because there's a lot of improvisation in the music, and there's just just a lot of soul in this music. It's Jewish soul music. So when I started associating with Murder, I was like, you gotta have Catskill Klezmer group come out. Oneonta is in the foothills of the Catskill Mountains. That's a mountain range that runs in upstate New York, and it was the place where a lot of the Jews from Manhattan, from the Lower East Side, would come and vacation. And so it was a big place for Klezmer music and other things like that. So, that's why the group is called the Catskill Klezmorim. Klezmorim is just a Yiddish word that means musician. So I just want to introduce the group to you one by one, and then they're going to take it away and they'll be talking with you further. So the leader of the group is here. This is Robin Seletsky on the clarinet. And Robin is also a classical musician, plays in symphony orchestras and opera orchestras. They're all multifaceted musicians. This is not the only thing they do. Otherwise, they'd be on welfare. So this is Robin. And then we have, over here on violin, this is Julie Sigisser. And on the piano, we have Kim Patterson. And the drummer, who's an Oneonta native, is Bill Manley. And back here we have a husband and wife. We have the two left over. Julie Jacobs and Oren Jacobs. Oren is kind of a triple threat because not only does he play the bass, but he also plays the bari sax, which you'll see, And but he's also a classical bassoonist as well. So that's great. And then Julie here is a professional cantor. Now the two of them have since escaped Oneonta and are now living in the homeland of Miami Beach. She is a cantor down there. So anyway, I think I've talked probably way too much. So let's turn it over to Robin Seletsky and Catskill Klezmorim.
We're going to play a lot of different kinds of folk music for you today, and what we're going to try and do is really capture what was lost in the Holocaust. I know you're have a whole semester and studying it from many different facets, but what you're going to hear today is some music that is very, very reflective, and some that is just filled with unbridled joy and wild abandon. And from between those two extremes and everything in between, our hope is that you'll get a sense, a very sort of wide-ranging sense of what the culture was like, what the people were like, what they did, how they sounded. And music has a wonderful way of conveying emotion and evoking emotion that transcends words. So it's our hope that that you'll get a very deep and profound sense of what was lost because of the Holocaust. The second half of the lecture, however, will focus on what has survived, what going forward, what the music, how the music goes forward, how Jewish culture moves forward, and that will be the second half. Klezmer, the word klezmer means two things. It means the music, so we play klezmer music, and it also means the musician. I'm a klezmer, the plural is Klezmorim, I have a suffix "im" is plural Hebrew, so we're Klezmorim, or Klezmorim is the Yiddish way of saying it. And it comes from two Hebrew words, Klezmer, vessel of song. Klez is vessel, Zemer song. And if you think about it, that's a really wonderful image of the musician, because klezmer means the musician. So the musician is just a vessel for the music to come through, to express to other people, or to share with other people. And I think it's not so much of a stretch to say that since klezmer also means the music is a vessel as well. The music holds the voice of the people. It's the vessel of song. We are vessels of song. The music is the vessel of the culture, the song of the culture. The language, I'm not sure how much some of you know this or not. I know your semester has only recently begun. But so some of it might be repetitive, some of it might be new. The language of the Eastern European Jews was Yiddish, not Hebrew, Yiddish. Yiddish was the common tongue, and it's mainly a lot of German, but it was changed and altered according to wherever Jews lived, and they lived all over the world. And so if they spoke Yiddish, but they lived in Hungary, they would speak Yiddish with Hungarian phrases. And American Jews, same thing. They came over, they spoke Yiddish, the immigrants spoke Yiddish. There are all sorts of words in our language now that are from Yiddish. Schlepp, right? There's a bunch of others, we can think of many others. Anyway, so Yiddish is sort of a very flexible, movable language. But the songs that you hear, most of them will be in Yiddish. Also, the only other thing I want to say before we start to play is that two things. Klezmer is secular music. It's not liturgical. It's not Jewish sacred music. It was folk music, dance music, wedding music, and in Yiddish. And Hebrew was the sacred tongue, is the sacred tongue, and that's a whole other spectrum which we won't really get into at all. And there are lots of kinds of Jewish music besides what we're going to play for you today. I'm going to try and give you a wide variety, but really there's many, many, many other styles. There's all kinds of styles out there. So this is just one aspect of Jewish folk music. Jewish music. We are going to start our program with a song called Prerequisite, and it's one of the ones that I gave the transliterations on the handout. And in some ways, this is really like the signature shtetl song, evoking the feeling of the shtetl, the people of the shtetl, the sound of the shtetl, and the words, which I don't think I have a list of words in front of me, but you can read it. But at the fireplace, the teacher, the rabbi, is teaching the Aleph base, the alphabet. In fact, a lot of Yiddish songs really, they're usually not without irony or something of that sort. This song is called To the Fair. And if you think of a Jewish wedding, the breaking of the glass, you break the glass because it's a celebration, but at the same time, down the road there, life has sharp edges, and you have to kind of be ready for them. And life is happy, and it's also sad. And Yiddish folk songs they capture a lot of different angles. They're usually not just nostalgia, and this one is no exception. So even though the tempo is very upbeat, this song is a little bit cynical. Not terribly cynical, but a little bit. He says, with quick steps, I went to the fair to buy a horse. My purse jingled with coins, and I sang. The city was a long way off when I came to an inn, and I said, "Innkeeper, Balabus, give me a glass." And I drink a glass, and then I drink another glass, and another glass, and another glass, and another glass, and another glass. And now, who wants to go to the city? Who needs a horse? No horse, no money. Now, surus, worry. That's what makes me sing. Yiddish music, Yiddish life, and you don't have to know the words. A lot of the songs just yai, yai, yai. That was a good example. Now, one of the most important life cycle events in the Jewish shtetl was the wedding. And the wedding was much more than a celebration, and much more than just like a one-day celebration. Really, the wedding was incredibly important because it represented continuity. Jewish continuity through the offspring, economic security and continuity through marriages and through, that was one reason why Tevye, Fiddler on the Roof, was so intent on, having his daughters married off. And Klezmer music, especially the instrumental music, really came out of the Jewish wedding. It was wedding dance music. The Klezmorim in Eastern Europe were itinerant musicians. They would travel from village to town, and as they traveled, they would absorb some of the influences from the other musicians in the other cultures. So if there were, just like the Yiddish absorbed other expressions and other aspects of the language, the musicians, if there were Klezmorim playing somewhere in Russia, and there were musicians from the Tsar's Russian army, they would absorb some of that sound in there, and some of that style. And there were many Klezmorim that connected with the Roma people, with the Gypsies. And probably, the guess is probably because they both shared outsider status in the native culture. So there were a lot of connections between Gypsies and Jewish, and between Gypsies and Gypsy music and Jewish music. We're going to recreate a Jewish wedding, at least the musical format of it. And the first thing we're going to play is a song called Fir de Machatonim, escorting the in-laws to the wedding. word. Machatzunim, the machatena, is a Yiddish word that describes the relationship of the mother of the bride to the mother of the groom. There's actually no word in English for it. In-laws isn't quite the right word. And you have to figure that when a culture, a society names something, that it must have been very important. You only name things that are important. You know, you don't name, what you had for dinner last night. You name your children, you name your pets, you name whatever. But it obviously means it's very important. And when a society names something, we can infer that it had a special place in society. And the Machatzunim did. Again, because it related to this whole issue of continuity and the wedding and everything that I said before. So we're going to do a song now called Machatenas de Maina. This is another one that you have on your sheet. My Machatena. And it's the mother of the bride speaking to the mother of the groom. And she says, my daughter is going to go live with your family after they get married, and I really hope that you treat her right. And if by some chance you don't treat her right, she can be just as much of a shrew as you are. So watch out for her.
Oh, you give
the Machatonim and everybody arrives at the wedding, there's the seating of the bride. And it was customary to play for the bride. One of the things that very often was played was something called a doina, and it was intended to make the bride cry. So it was intended to just really kind of, you know, pull the emotional strings of the family. It's a very emotional time getting married and all of that. So, so I'm going to play a little doina. What you're going to hear in this are a lot of different influences. It's basically very free. You're going to hear a lot of melismatic, a lot of notes, kind of fast notes, melismatic playing, and that really comes from the cantorial singing that the cantor does in the synagogue. Again, this is secular music, but you can start seeing all these cross influences. So I'll play a little doina. Seated, musicians would play for her, and they might play something like this. do the signature. And after the wedding, a lot of dancing. Here's a big wedding dance number. Except we have to change instruments. Now, I may, let me take this minute to say a couple of things. The first is that a lot of these songs that we're doing are on our CD, and I was told before that it's okay for me to mention it, and if you're interested, you can purchase our CD. We have them for sale, and actually we have to schlep back on the airplanes tonight or tomorrow, so the fewer we have, the better. So we can schlepping them with us, but in any case, just so you know. And also, you might hear a few things in this medley that maybe they didn't have in that picture that I put on the front of that little handout that I gave. It's a little bit of a, some of those musicians look okay, but a lot of these pictures of these old Klezmer bands, they look really schlock and really kind of tattered. These look a little more upscale. But obviously, they didn't have a Gary sax in Eastern Europe, and they didn't have some of the sounds that you hear. And that's some of the point that I'm going to get to later in the lecture about how Klezmer has evolved. And we sort of, you know, our program today is in many ways representative of that. All right. on to sort of the second half of the lecture. There's a piece that I'd like to play that, again, is going to show Klezmer evolving. And it's a piece that was written for us by Chairman of the Music Department, Dr. Brian Wilson, and it's one of several pieces that he wrote for us. But this one relates to the lecture in that it is a programmatic piece, a piece that tells a story based on Yiddish folklore, on particularly a figure in Yiddish folklore called the golem. And the golem was a giant made of clay. And Rabbi Lowe of Prague, a wise man in the city of Prague, wanted to protect the Jewish people from pogroms. If you don't know what pogroms were these really horrific, violent incursions into Jewish villages and Jewish communities. Sometimes they were just the local people, sometimes they were militias, sanctioned by the local government. But they were really terrible, and they lasted for many, many, many years, on and on. And so, in the story, in this legend, Rabbi Lowe wants to protect the Jews, so he creates a giant out of clay that he thinks is going to save the Jews from pogroms. And he goes down to the riverbank, and after he makes this figure, he writes the Hebrew word emet on the forehead, which means truth. And that breathes life into the golem. How interesting. The word truth is sort of a life giver. Anyway, that's part of the legend. So he writes emet on the forehead. And the thing about the golem is that the golem wasn't human, so its intentions were neither good nor bad. So sometimes the golem did, in some of the stories, the golem did save the Jews and did good things and protected the people, but sometimes its sheer size and its sort of unearthly power without human wisdom made it possibly a destructive force. So in this piece, there's a section where the golem begins to dance, and it's a very heavy-footed, sort of lopsided dance in 7/8 time. You know, if you ever try to dance in 7/8 time, it's a little difficult because we have 2 feet. So you always want it to be even. Dances and marches, they're all in 2 or 4 or some even number. If you have a dance that's in an odd number, it's a little tough. So Brian wrote this in 7/8 time, and it evokes this image of the golem dancing. The problem is that as the music gets more and more frenetic, and the golem gets more and more excited, the earth shakes and the buildings tumble. And so Rabbi Lowe knows that he probably has to destroy the golem. So the way that he does it is he goes up to the golem and he erases the aleph, the first letter, on the golem's forehead. And the word that's left is met, which in Hebrew means death. And the golem dies. It begins with 7 incantations. These are the incantations and the words that create life from nothing.
creature stirs. The golem is dead. Or is he?
Now I'd like to just open this up for any questions. If you have any questions so far, we can also take questions at the end. But if anybody has anything they'd like to ask, if any of us would be happy to talk a little bit. Yeah?
In the Montez
Yeah.
what if the bride doesn't cry?
A Jewish bride not crying?
It's okay. It's all okay. Whatever happens is okay. She can cry or not to cry. Yes.
In the song about the mothers-in-law,
Yeah.
my daughter coming to you with a wig.
Right.
What is the significance?
Julie, you want to speak to that?
It's probably in reference to the more Orthodox Jews. It's customary for the woman to have her head covered. Either she wears a sheitel, which is a wig, or some kind of scarf covering her head. It's modesty. Usually also the women in the Orthodox community have long skirts to the floors with stockings on, shoes, high necks, nothing, no skin exposed. So that's one of the ways that they're held sacred and higher, because they are so amazing that only their husband can see them in their natural beauty.
And it's the thing with the hair too is that women, before they get married, one of the rituals is they shave their head. So they would come with the sheitel, they would come with their head covered the first time after they're married, or right before the wedding. I'm not exactly sure, the sequence of events, how that works. But up to them, when they're a girl, they have hair. And part of it is that, it's modesty. It's like the hair was thought to be very seductive. So it's a way of not being seductive to men other than your husband. So they shave their heads in. But it happens, that's part of the ritual, part of the change from going from a girl to a bride. Anything else? Yeah?
So what thus far is before the Holocaust? Everything?
Everything we played, except for Brian's piece, but the legend obviously existed before the Holocaust. That's why I put it on this half. The Gene Krupa drumming really didn't. The Barry sax didn't. And that was something that we were fooling around, and we just thought, well, let's try it. Let's see what it sounds like. And we liked the way it sounded, and so we did it. And really, that's sort of the thrust of this whole second half, which is that Klezmer died out when Yiddish culture died out, when Eastern European all Jewish culture was completely wiped out. The language was, essentially lost. Some, survivors spoke it, and some immigrants in other countries spoke it, but it was no longer so much a living language. And the music died out, and the people died. I mean, the whole culture was wiped out. And so people didn't play klezmer music. The only times that it was played, or the way that it existed, was immigrants who had come to this country before the Holocaust, or had gone to other countries before the Holocaust, and survived. They brought their instruments with them. There were some very famous musicians, Naftali Brandwein, I put that on the discography, Dave Terrace, and they came as immigrants. They brought their clarinets and their instruments, and whatever sheet music, most of it was learned by ear, obviously, and they formed bands and they played. And there was also a thriving Yiddish theater phenomenon on 2nd Avenue in New York City, and a lot of them played there. But what happened was that as a result of assimilation, on the one hand, and times changing, and also acculturation, as those musicians died off, then there was nobody playing music. And there was, and as that generation died off, there was nobody speaking Yiddish. about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, there began to be a big spirited revival of this music in this country and also in Europe. And people were discovering the few recordings that there were, and also some of the sheet music that survived, and some of the few players that were still around. And so there was a whole group of people that got together and said, this is great stuff, let's print it, let's play it, let's record it, let's have Klezmer festivals and Klez camps and Klez Canada, Klez California, there was a Klez California, and let's make it happen again. And it worked, it did. A lot of people got very, very excited about it. It also coincided with a move towards multiculturalism and globalism and all sorts of other things. So there are a lot of factors involved in the revival. The other aspect of the revival is that Klezmer is very, very big in Eastern Europe, especially in Germany. And it's kind of a loaded, it's kind of a loaded issue. Some great Klezmer musicians come out of there, and it's hugely popular. In Krakow, Poland, there is a Klezmer festival every year that draws 10,000 people. It's huge. They dance in the streets. The thing about that, and one of the books that I included on the bibliography speaks to this, and it's very interesting if you want to read more about it, is that it becomes a little like, our country, our government kind of wiped out the Native Americans, and then we go to a souvenir store and we buy moccasins. It's a little bit like that. So their interest in Klezmer, it becomes a little, it's a funny double-edged thing. But in any case, you can read more about that. But it's a huge revival. But, like all revivals, if all it was just playing the old songs, like Life and Triptych Chick, in the old style, that's not really a revival. That's nostalgia, maybe, or some sort of historical recreation for historical purposes. But it's not really a revival. A revival means, by its very definition, that it is alive. And when something is alive, a person, a music, whatever, it creates. It has to. It's inevitable. And it evolves. So we are all musicians of our time. We can't help it. We can't help having, the sound of 30s and 40s swing in our ear. We can't help having the sound of rock and roll in our ear. And so that's naturally going to affect the way that we decide to play the music, sometimes very consciously, sometimes unconsciously. So what I'd like to do now is bring you to the survival of Klezmer music from the 30s swing and the way it has progressed and evolved since then. So we're going to do a song now called By Mir Bist Du Schön. And we're actually going to do it in English, it's a Yiddish song, in the swing style, but the fact that we're doing it it's in Yiddish, but the fact that we're doing it in English shows you a little bit of the cross-cultural stuff happening.
You're the fairest in the Quick story about that song. In the truest form of American capitalism, that song was written by a Jewish theater composer in the Lower East Side, Shalom Sekunda. Wrote tons of tunes for the Jewish Yiddish theater in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Wrote this song, thought it was cute, played it for somebody, said, great tune, I'll buy it from you. Well, money was tight, said, okay, what's the price? $35. Okay, now this is like either 1932 or 1933, so $35 put a lot of bread on the table, literally. And so that was it, sold it outright. It had Yiddish lyrics, of course, to begin with. Well, the song started getting circulated around Tin Pan Alley in New York, and people were going, oh, that's a really cool tune. An American, very famous American composer and lyricist, Johnny Mercer, wrote those lyrics. Well, brought it to his friend, I guess it almost positively would have to be Decca Records at the time, to this trio of girls named the Andrews Sisters. If you've ever heard of them, if you haven't, probably one of the most famous vocal acts of the 30s and 40s. Sold hundreds, probably millions of copies of records. Again, in the truest form of American capitalism, never saw another nickel. So the $35 tune became more famous than he'll ever know. And sometimes, occasionally, we saw his name on the credits, but most of the time we never did. We never knew, really, that he wrote it, except if you would come across the Yiddish version.
Well, we're going to move from the 40s, 30s and 40s swing, to more contemporary rock and roll. And I'm going to play a little Klezmer-inspired tune, if you can call it that. That's a little more avant-garde, a little more bluesy. It was recorded by a friend of mine, an incredible clarinetist, David Krakauer, and I'll play it for you now.
Is that where you were all?
We're very near. We're very near. Actually, most of us, we grew up in different parts. I grew up in New York City. Oren and Julie grew up in Jersey. Bill actually grew up in Oneonta. No?
Connecticut.
Oh, Connecticut. I'm sorry. And Kim grew up in Colorado. Julie grew up in St. Louis. And we all sort of went to college in various places, and some of us lived and freelanced in New York for a while. And then somehow we all ended up in Oneonta for all different reasons. Oneonta, New York, small town. And that was before Julie was in the group. And we formed a band, and we started working. We had a great time. And then Oren met Julie on the internet. And the rest is history.
11 years ago.
And it was a total match made in heaven. They were total soulmates.
And then I sang You Made Me Love You at our wedding, and Robin saw me singing, and she said, oh, you can sing?
I said,
Want to sing in our band? I said,
that's exactly what happened. She belted at You Made Me Love You, so I said, got it. So, but the only bad thing was that then Oren moved down to New York to be with Julie, who was working as a cantor in Brooklyn Heights. So anyway, and Bill moved to Boston. So we kind of have separated, but we get together to play. We played in Miami last year for Big Cantors Convention. We play, in New York, upstate New York, all over. So we have a great time with it. Yeah. Anything else? What? Top right, whoever it is, yeah.
Hi.
Good.
Hi, it seemed like every wedding I went to back in the 70s played Hava Nagila, even my own.
I was just going to talk about that.
Was that Klezmer?
No, Hava Nagila is not Klezmer. The wedding dance medley that we played for you was the Hava Nagila of the time. But Hava Nagila is not a Klezmer tune. It's more of a contemporary Israeli tune. And that has become almost cliche. We play it at weddings too because people like it. If we played like a lot of Klezmer, people, you can't relate to it because it's really, to some degree you can relate to it in certain times, but when you're expecting Hava Nagila and you hear Klezmer, it doesn't quite work. But Hava Nagila is, it's not Klezmer. And that's actually a very important thing. First of all, it's in Hebrew. And this brings us to our very last song, which is in Hebrew, and which also is an Israeli song. And I wanted to play it to close our program because I thought it would just give you a little bit more of a sense of where Jewish music has gone. When the State of Israel was created, there was a lot of discussion as to whether the language should be Yiddish or Hebrew. Many of the people that were going to Israel were Yiddish survivors, and they were Yiddish speakers. And there was also a feeling that Hebrew was the sacred tongue, and it shouldn't be used as a common language. So there was a big discussion. But in the end, Hebrew won out. So now there's modern Hebrew that's spoken, and it's also still used, obviously, in the liturgy. And so where did that leave Yiddish? Nowhere. Literally nowhere. So it became, only the survivors that spoke it, the people that had come here to this country, sometimes the first generation spoke it, and then after a while the language gets lost and it's gone. So there is kind of a resurgence of Yiddish, but it's still, I wouldn't exactly call it a living language. In some Hasidic communities, actually Yiddish is spoken to the children, and it becomes their native tongue. But for the most part, it's not. So, but there's interest in it. I'm in a Yiddish class. There are Yiddish clubs all over the country. If you're interested, there's tons and tons of web material, and there's a real effort made to keep it alive. But we're going to close with something that's actually very different from everything we've played so far. This is a modern Israeli pop song, and I'm playing it so that you can see the whole progression. It's by a Yemenite singer named Noah, and it's a love song. It's in Hebrew. You'll hear some Middle Eastern influences, and you'll hear some rock influences, and we're going to give it a go. And yes, go ahead.
For those of us that still have roots on the East Coast, is your schedule for the coming year available on request?
Absolutely. I have a website. It's Klezmorim.com, and I'll give it to you. I'll speak to you afterwards, and I'll make sure I give it to you. And I'll put you on our mailing list, and then you can do it that way. Yeah. Any other questions? Any other comments? This has been a real treat for us. I can't thank Brian enough for all the hard work. Myrna, thank you. Everybody at the temple where we played on Sunday, thank you. The class is great. You guys are curious and attentive, and it's been a real pleasure. So thank you very, very much. Yeah.
You guys play almost all like Ashkenazi stuff in Yiddish. Is there any counterpart Ladino?
There is. That's a good question. Ladino was the language of the Sephardic Jews, and Klezmer is essentially the music of the Ashkenazi Jews. Ladino music has a lot of Sephardic influence in it, and it's Hebrew and Spanish, and the music sounds very different, sounds very Spanish. We've played a few in the past, but we don't really incorporate a huge amount of Ladino. Ladino music is great. Sephardic music is wonderful. Yeah, a lot of Middle Eastern and Arabic influence in it as well. Yeah. But Klezmer technically is Ashkenazi. Anything else? Okay.
את כל הכוכבים תאמן, את השכר אותך בשחור, מצפון ועד תימן, אין קבר אור. את כל הכוכבים תאמן, את השכר אותך בשחור, מצפון ועד תימן, אין קבר אור. אין אור. את השכר אתה תשחור